So you wake up in the morning and you think you hear this new little bird that you haven't seen before, and it's this beep beep sound that comes from somewhere outside of your tent. Get down to make a cup of coffee, and as you look into the battery monitor you see this. Two red lights, and it says 11.6 volts. Now I can tell you for free that that is not a good thing. Typically on my tours I see this happen around about day 2 or day 3, depending on the condition of the battery. So I say, well, what can I do? This is not good for me. Let me start my vehicle, because starting the vehicle will obviously solve a lot of problems. So let's start the vehicle and see what happens. Alright, so the vehicle is started and everything is looking good. The battery monitor is picking up, I've got green lights, and I let the vehicle run for half an hour. And in half an hour the green lights pick up a little bit more, things are really looking good. So I switched the vehicle off, problem solved, Bob's your uncle. What really happened? Let's switch the vehicle off and continue having our breakfast. There you have it. We are back down to 2 red lights. And what's going on? Well, don't know. The battery was in the green just now. Now the battery is back in the red. So what can we do about this? Before I damage my batteries too much, let me switch on the vehicle and I'll explain the whole situation. So the first thing I need to explain is why your battery would fluctuate between whatever it is. It drops down, it comes back up slightly, it drops down, comes back up slightly. And that has got to do with the loads that you have. So if you want to know the real state of a battery, you need to disconnect all the loads, disconnect all the charges, and leave it for a few minutes. Half an hour or so is ideal, but obviously you can't always spare half an hour. So you have to disconnect all your loads, leave the battery for a bit just to settle down, and then take a reading. That will give you an accurate reading of the actual battery capacity at the time. For example, where I am now, it's sitting at 25%, which is really low. It's bad for lead acid, but if the fridge comes in, it will drop, and if the fridge goes off, it will come back to the 25% again. Let's do that and I'll show you how it works. So there you have the fridge running, and you've dropped a light. And if the fridge is now running for half an hour, it will remain somewhere there, and then when the fridge switches off, when it reached its temperature, that light will return and we'll be back on 25%. Switch is off and the battery settles back into where it actually is. So the battery is sitting at the moment at 25%, and I need to understand exactly what all these lights mean on the side of my indicator. So let me explain the indicator to you. First of all, let's start with what we are using to establish what we have in our batteries. This is just a normal voltmeter. The voltmeter is not a needle-like voltmeter, but it rather uses a series of lights to indicate the status of the voltage. So the biggest mistake people make is normally to just look at this and assume that green is good, yellow is normal, and red is bad. That is the normal assumption that you would make. Now, I can tell you, if you are running lead acid batteries, like the normal vehicle out there would have, then these lights are generally fairly accurate, although I don't agree with the bottom red ones. I would rather have red up to 50%. I would only have 4 orange lights. Reason for that is lead acid batteries do not like to be dropped down too low. But that's besides the point. So be careful of assuming that when you see yellow lights that the battery is in good condition. The bottom 3, in my opinion, is a little bit dodgy. They should be red as well. A lead acid battery, if you want the extended life, you never want to drop the discharge below half of the battery's life. 60% is even better, 60% capacity. So you use 40, you save 60, nothing less than that would probably be ideal. And 60% sits at around 12.3 volts on a lead acid battery. The second thing to think of is what type of battery you have. Now, the lead acid, you have gel, you have the glass matte, you have normal semi-deep cycle. These batteries are all variations of lead acid batteries, and they all work on these voltages. However, you get the lithium iron phosphate. Lithium iron phosphate batteries have a different chemical makeup, and their full voltage is not at 12.8 as we have on these lights. Their full is at 13.2, if I'm not mistaken. So these lights, if you see two greens on the battery indicator on a lithium iron phosphate, it would mean then they are full. So the orange should stretch into the first two little green lights. So the point of this is be careful of what the lights actually tell you. Don't assume that green is good, yellow is alright, and red is bad. It doesn't really represent that. It only gives you a voltage. You need to interpret the voltage that you see. So let's talk about the actual voltages that I see. In this one, on this example, you can see there's two green lights at the moment. Those two green lights happens above 12.8 volts. And that means that your batteries are charging. The green lights do not mean that your batteries are in good condition. It only means your batteries are charging. If you take the charge off and you leave the battery to settle down, it will come back down to 12.8 and you will be back into a full battery condition. So green does not mean that it is fully charged. Green only means that it is charging. So while you're running your vehicle or while you have the charger on it, you should be seeing green lights, because that means it is busy charging. If you switch your vehicle off and you disconnect all power supplies, then you should see the green disappear. So the fact that green disappears when you switch your vehicle off is normal. That means that the batteries are fully charged. What you want to see then is the battery running up to 100%. So it sits at 100%, you switch the vehicle off, and if you leave your loads off, it doesn't lose lights. If you leave your loads off, the fridge and everything is off, the car is switched off, and the battery drops lights and it comes back down to 50 or 60%, then you know that is the state of your battery at the time. So very important to remember that the green, yellow and red does not represent exactly what is happening. It only gives you an indicator. And as soon as you have loads on the system, or as soon as you have charges on the system, these lights will confuse you. So remember, an accurate reading of where your battery's condition is at that time is to switch off the charger, switch off all the loads, wait a little bit and see where the lights settle. That will give you a good indication. Second thing to remember, different batteries have different voltages for different positions of their state of charge. So remember that as well. So if I run my vehicle, I get a few green lights and I think everything is great. And I switch the vehicle off, I finish my breakfast and suddenly I'm back into the red lights again. Why did it stay green when I switched my vehicle off? That doesn't really make a lot of sense. And the reason for that is a surface charge. Now, what happens is the battery is receiving a charge. Where the chemical and the lead interact, your electron transferals are happening right there. And on the surface, you are creating a new charge. But that surface charge is not a deep charge in itself. That surface charge is only on the surface. And as soon as you switch your vehicle off or you remove the charge and then add a load like a fridge going on, that surface charge will be depleted almost immediately. So be careful of noticing 100% on your lights and after half an hour of the car idling or 15 minutes and saying, oh no, the batteries are good, I switched the car off and it's at 100%, everything is lacquer. Batteries are full. They are not full. You only have a surface charge. And ultimately, if you have a 105 amp hour battery, you might have only, let's say you've drained this down to 60% and it's sitting with, or you used 40 amp hours. Then you, by running the vehicle for 15 minutes or for 20 minutes, you probably have only reintroduced about 10 amp hours. Say half an hour, you might have reintroduced about 10 amp hours. There's a calculation that you can do for this. It's not a lot. So it's going to show 100% charged if you look at your lights, but because the voltage is back to where it should be. But the amp hours that you replaced was just a little bit. And those amp hours are going to last you for 2 or 3 hours, and the battery will be back down to the 50% mark where it was. So yes, you do score a little bit, but remember, as I said in another video, that 40 amp hours that you drain, you try to replenish with your 10 amp hours, but that 10 amp hours are coming from your main battery and it is also coming from your alternator. So be careful not to use to drain your main battery when you are doing this starting the vehicle cycle thing. So I'm not always in favor of starting a vehicle in the morning. One is it makes a lot of noise in the camp. Two, it spews out all these diesel fumes for people having breakfast or a nice quiet morning looking at birds. You have diesel cars running and idling. And I prefer in my groups to set a specific time. If people want to charge batteries a little bit and we didn't go out for the day, then we will set a time for an hour and say between 4 and 5 this afternoon you can idle vehicles just to get the batteries up a little bit and try and protect the batteries. So I would do something like that to accommodate getting the lights back into the green. But otherwise, this is how the meter works. So read it with that in mind, and be sure that this meter doesn't tell you exactly what the state of the battery is. It only gives you the voltage. You can get a surface charge that gives you a false reading. You can have lithium batteries that will give you a false reading. And then you can go down into the 40% and you are at 12.1 volts. And that is too low for lead acid. You cannot run a lead acid battery that low. So be aware what the lights are telling you. And yeah, that's that's the realities of camping. I hope this helps. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, happy camping. Cheers.